They thought monsters like him didn't exist. Not in their society. Not under their rule. But they were wrong. For over a decade, children disappeared, women vanished, and bodies were found mutilated across Soviet landscapes. There was no pattern, no motive, and no suspect. Just fear and silence. Authorities blamed the West. They blamed the victims. But never the idea that a man, born from their own soil, could be behind it all. His name was Andrei Chikatilo. A schoolteacher, a father, a murderer. This is the story of the Red Ripper, the Butcher of Rostov, and how he slaughtered his way through a broken system that refused to believe he existed. Welcome back to Prison Stories. Today, we're discussing one of the most disturbing cases in criminal history. Andrei Chikatilo wasn't just a killer. He was a ghost in the Soviet system. A man who used chaos, fear, and bureaucracy to hide in plain sight, leaving over 50 bodies in his wake. The year is 1982. In the quiet mining town of Shakhty, in the Rostov region of the Soviet Union, a 13-year-old Yuba went missing. She had gone out to visit her grandmother, but she never arrived. For days her family searches. Police join in, reluctantly. Posters go up. Whispers grow louder. And then just outside town, deep in a wooded area, her body is found. She'd been stabbed, mutilated, and just discarded like that in the forest. The brutality is unlike anything the officers have seen. The case is filed. Investigators take notes. But quietly, behind closed doors, there's a problem. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and it won't be the last. In the Soviet Union, serial killers weren't supposed to exist. The party believed that murder, especially this kind of murder, was a symptom of Western decay, not something homegrown. Admitting otherwise would be an admission of failure, so the reports are buried. The case isn't made public. Instead, they pin the murder on a mentally ill man with a weak alibi. He's convicted, executed, case closed. Andrei Chikatilo is nowhere near that courtroom, but he's watching. He knows what he's done, and he knows he just got away with it. He's only getting started. In most countries, a string of murders like this would set off alarms. But this was the Soviet Union. Here, government wanted people to believe there were no serial killers in the society. Meanwhile, Andrei Chikatilo was watching it all unfold, and he was thriving. He worked as a supply clerk for a traveling company, which meant he had an excuse to be in dozens of different towns. His job gave him access to train stations and bus depots, the very places he used to hunt. He targeted the invisible, street kids, runaways, young women with nowhere to go, people no one would miss right away. Every time he got away with it, he became more confident, more brutal. By the end of 1983, the body count was rising. The method was nearly identical. Stabbing, slashing, sexual mutilation, and always victims had their eyes gouged out. Some believed it was superstition. But whatever his reasons, the message was clear. The monster wasn't hiding. The system was just refusing to see him. Andrei Chikatilo's story didn't begin in the dark woods of Rostov. It started in a small Ukrainian village in 1936, at a time when the world was gripped by the horrors of war. He was born into poverty, a weak child in a family struggling to survive. His early years were marked by hardship. From the moment he was born, Andrei was exposed to trauma. His mother spoke of his older brother being kidnapped and eaten by neighbors during the famine, a story that, whether true or not, would haunt Andrei throughout his life. He grew up with a deep-seated fear and suspicion of the world around him, an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. Chikatilo had trouble speaking and was often the target of ridicule from other children. His classmates would mock his stutter, and he would retreat into himself. His father was distant and often absent, leaving his mother to raise him in a cold, authoritarian household. As a young man, Chikatilo tried to find his place in the world. He attended university, studying engineering, and later became a teacher. On the surface, he lived a life many would consider ordinary. He married, had children, and held down a steady job. But beneath the surface, the trauma of his childhood and adolescence festered. He had always struggled with feelings of inadequacy, especially in his sexual life. His marriage was strained, and his impotence only deepened his sense of humiliation and frustration. By the late 1970s, Chikatilo's frustrations would finally explode into violence. His job as supply clerk allowed him to travel freely across the Soviet Union. He began targeting train stations, bus stops, and remote wooded areas, places where people came and went without question. Many of his victims were young runaways, students, or people living on the margins of society, people the system often overlooked. HI's crimes followed a pattern, but Soviet police forces were fragmented. Each region handled their own investigations, and there was little communication between jurisdictions. That gave Chikatilo the space he needed. He was methodical, calm, and polite in public. He looked nothing like the monster investigators were imagining. And back then, there was no criminal database, no DNA analysis, just guesswork and gut feeling. At one point, Chikatilo was even placed under surveillance. Police suspected him, but didn't have enough evidence to act. Without a direct link, they let him go. That mistake would cost many more lives. Andrei Chikatilo wasn't just hiding from the law. He was learning how to outsmart it. By the late 1980s, the fear was impossible to ignore. Across cities like Rostov, Shakhty, and Novoshakhtinsk, the bodies kept appearing, often near train stations, forests, or remote paths. Authorities knew they had a serial killer on their hands. Even if the word serial killer was still taboo in Soviet society, the government couldn't keep it quiet any longer. The public was scared. Rumors spread like wildfire. Parents warned children not to go out alone. Strangers were eyed with suspicion. The entire region was on edge. In 1984, a dedicated task force was finally assembled. The group began combing through every unsolved murder in the region. It wasn't just about forensics. It was about patterns, victim profiles, locations, travel records. And soon, a profile began to emerge. The man they were looking for wasn't some wild-eyed predator. He was quiet, intelligent, middle-aged. Someone who could pass through crowds unnoticed. Someone organized. The investigation led them to question hundreds of suspects. Polygraphs were administered, files reviewed, dead ends piled up, but one name kept resurfacing: Andrei Chikatilo. In 1990, Chikatilo was spotted at a train station, approaching young people in a way that made a patrolling officer suspicious. He was picked up and brought in for questioning. This time, they didn't let him go. They searched his belongings. They looked into his past more thoroughly. They found inconsistencies, odd behavior, failed polygraph results, and a clear overlap between his travel routes and the locations of multiple murders. But most importantly, they found blood-type evidence from the crime scenes that, at first glance, didn't match Chikatilo's. That was because of a rare condition. His blood type and his semen type didn't align, which had confused investigators for years. Once this was understood, the path to the truth began to open. Still, they needed a confession. Viktor Burakov, the lead investigator, knew they were close. Still, without a confession, there was no case strong enough for a conviction. So they called in someone else. Dr. Alexander Buchanovsky, a psychiatrist who had spent years studying criminal behavior. Buchanovsky didn't walk in with accusations or threats. He spoke to Chikatilo as a man who understood him, who saw through the mask. And it worked. After days of psychological games, silence, and tension, Chikatilo broke. He confessed. He admitted to killing dozens of victims over a span of 12 years. He didn't express remorse, only explanation. He spoke of his urges, his frustrations, and the strange satisfaction he got from the crimes. To the investigators listening, it was more than shocking. It was exhausting. He took them to crime scenes, described what he did, gave dates, names, memories, and it lined up with the evidence. For the first time, the full scope of Chikatilo's crimes came into focus. 53 murders. Victims as young as 7. Others in their teens, early 20s. Most of them vulnerable. People who wouldn't be missed right away. Each revelation painted a clearer picture of how he had evaded capture for so long, and how easily he had blended in. The man who once taught children in Soviet classrooms had become Russia's most notorious serial killer. Chikatilo's trial was nothing less than dramatic, and it was unlike anything the Soviet public had ever witnessed. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, grieving families, law enforcement, even the curious. Everyone wanted to see the face of the man who had haunted the country for over a decade. When Chikatilo was brought in, he was placed inside a steel cage, literally. Authorities feared an attack from the public or even a violent outburst from Chikatilo himself. He paced inside like a caged animal, sometimes shouting, sometimes grinning, sometimes silent. His behavior was erratic. One moment he denied everything. The next, he exploded into wild rants. At times, he exposed himself or screamed nonsense, whether it was genuine mental illness or a last-ditch act to plead insanity. No one was sure. But the evidence was overwhelming. Survivors gave testimony. Investigators laid out his confession. Crime scene maps, timelines, forensic reports. It was undeniable. The scale, the planning, the patterns, it all pointed to a man, Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo was convicted of 52 murders and sentenced to death. For many families, it was closure they'd waited years for. He spent the next 2 years in a prison in Rostov-on-Don, isolated and under heavy security. On February 14, 1994, the sentence was carried out. A single bullet to the back of the head. It was the last execution ever carried out in Russia before the country declared a moratorium on the death penalty. Andrei Chikatilo's crimes exposed deep flaws in the Soviet system, failures in communication, forensic science, and justice itself. Dozens of lives were lost before the truth came to light, and one innocent man was executed for Chikatilo's first murder. His case remains one of the darkest chapters in criminal history, a chilling reminder of what happens when a killer goes unnoticed for too long. Thank you for watching Prison Stories. If you found this documentary insightful, like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories from around the world.